Hello, Matt.
Hello, Bill.
How are you today?
I'm doing well.
The heat wave has passed in D.C.?
Pretty much. It was brutal the last couple of weeks. It's so funny. Yesterday it was like 95 and it felt like autumn. So, because in D.C. it's a swamp. It's not just the heat; it's the humidity. Right. So, we make do.
We had that weather last week too here in Western Massachusetts, and a couple of acquaintances of mine came up from D.C. and said, "Wait a second, I was trying to leave the heat. What to do? Why is it following me up here?" But they noted that while it felt like D.C. up here, it felt like Dante's Fifth Circle, down where you were.
Oh yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's this theory that if air conditioning hadn't been invented, that we'd be better off because Congress couldn't even be in session. Now, there's so many other, caveats to that. Well, if air conditioning hadn't been invented, then population centers wouldn't have moved to places like Arizona, and that would have repercussions as well. Maybe
It's
not.
Trying to sound like some hippie.
Dude, here's the thing, man. Everybody thinks they can put me in this little box, and then I'm going to just be, this, whatever they think I am, this Republican whatever. I am a complex, nuanced person. You should know that by now.
Well, when the global warming apocalypse comes, you and I can start a raw food commune in Quebec, in the Quebec hinterlands.
Could we also make chunky?
We can sustain on nuts and twigs.
And chunky monkey. We could do ice cream. Or actually, I would be all about. I'm a big fan of this froyo. I like the tangy, like the pink berry yogurt. Maybe we could somehow make that too.
Well, speaking of congressional swamps, as we tape, it's a couple hours before the Boehner bill gets voted on in Congress, so we don't know the outcome yet. Although I guess the good money is that we'll pass by a hair. Is that fair to say?
Do you want to go there? I mean,
we'll be proven wrong in a matter of minutes. So
I know
there's no need to go there.
It's tempting.
But in the lead up to this vote, it seems like there's been a split in the conservative movement around how to handle this.
Yeah.
The biggest figures involved, I would say, are Bill Kristol and Erick Erickson, the blogger at Red State. And with Erickson arguing that no compromise bills at all beyond the cut, cap, and balance bill that passed last week. He keeps repeating this hold the freaking line call. And while Kristol is being more favorable to saying everyone should get behind Boehner and give Boehner a united front. And I'm personally curious about the rise of Erick Erickson here. And I've asked this question, I think, on a handful of other episodes. But it seems even more relevant now because it seems to be that there are some Congress people that actually call up Erick at Red State and see if they can get his permission to do whatever. And maybe that's just Erick embellishing his role in all of this. But would you say that he has become a main bellwether of conservative purity in the past year? And if so, what has happened to put him in particular in this role? I mean, there's lots of other conservative bloggers out there. You already have talk radio show hosts with bigger audiences. I mean, do you understand how Erick got himself into this position?
Well, first let me just back up a little bit and talk about. You're right. There is this interesting schism, and I mean, a lot of times it's very easy to figure out these schisms. So you have people like David Brooks versus people like Mark Levin. And so it's very obvious, you've got essentially the establishment versus, the sort of hardcore conservatives. This is much more complex because you've got Laura Ingraham, who's for the Boehner bill, who I think is considered a bona fide conservative. Grover Norquist, who's for the Boehner bill. Bill Kristol, I think Charles Krauthammer. So they're for the Boehner bill, and then you've got groups like the Club for Growth that are against it. You've got Erick Erickson that's against it. You've got Jim DeMint who's against it. So it's kind of predictable, but the point is, and this sort of like underscores a larger point, that it's gotten so granular now that it's not really rhinos versus conservatives. It's actually within the conservative movement itself, there is a split between people, and I think this is, it's something that used to be pretty rare, and more this is becoming something we talk about. But so that's interesting to note, and we can talk more about that if you want. To answer your question about Erick Erickson, I mean, I think I probably know Erick and understand him about as well as anybody, any observer. I've known Erick for years. I think he's a really good guy. I do think he is incredibly influential. I think that he is, among a list of people that, Jim DeMint, the Club for Growth, Rush Limbaugh, and I think Erick Erickson is sort of the blog guy that you go to. I mean, you've got talk radio people, you've got conservative outside groups. And I think Red State and Erick are definitely powerful and important. I sense that now there's a very interesting thing that happened most recently, and again, I don't want to talk about something that's going to be old news by the time this airs, but a sort of sideshow playing out now is Jim Jordan, Jim Jordan, who heads the Republican Study Committee, the RSC, within the Republican Conference.
And that is a conservative faction within the House Republican caucus. So I think it encompasses the majority of the House Republican caucus.
I don't know if it's the majority, but you're otherwise correct, and you may or may not be right about the majority. But a lot of Republicans are in it. It used to be chaired by Mike Pence. Now it's chaired by this guy Jim Jordan from Ohio. And a couple days ago, yesterday, in fact, Wednesday, Paul Teller, who's his executive director, and another staffer, it was revealed that they were sending out emails basically urging conservatives to whip or to criticize other RSC members, dues-paying members, who were backing the Boehner bill. And so here you have a situation where you have staffers who are essentially, urging activists to harass or lobby, however you want to see it, dues-paying members of this organization. And it was revealed during a closed-door meeting. And so now Jordan, who has been publicly against the Boehner bill, finds himself in hot water. And the most recent story to come out of Ohio is that he may find himself in trouble when it comes to redistricting, that Boehner and or the GOP powers that be might give him a competitive race as sort of payback for this. And I bring this story up because I think it ties into to what's happening with Erick Erickson and the Club for Growth, which is that in recent years, the conservative leadership in the House and Senate have become essentially emasculated. They've become neutered. You saw that the conservative movement and the Club for Growth and DeMint, last year, went up against Mitch McConnell in his home state and outmaneuvered him, electing Rand Paul, somebody that Mitch McConnell did not back, in fact, opposed. And it's just, these institutions and these leaders are just a shell of, the revered, think of like Tip O'Neill and LBJ, the masters of the Senate, Speaker of the House, who ruled their delegations with an iron fist. And now you have people standing up to the Speaker of the House. And so, and people like bloggers like Erick Erickson and talk radio hosts and groups like the Club for Growth, just outmaneuvering Republican Party leaders. And I think there's a sense that the empire is striking back. And I think that Boehner is fighting for his political life. But if he wins this battle, you may see him impose a bit of a stronger hand, and there could be a balancing out a little bit where the party establishment, sort of puts some people in line. So we'll see what happens.
And that's not been the way Boehner has handled his job to date. He's tried to present himself as sort of this devil-may-care speaker. Wherever the chips fall, vote with me, vote against me, whatever, it's all good. And this is the first time where he's really seemed to be playing the arm-twisting game.
Yeah, well, I think he sort of has to. I don't want to get into the vote too much because, again, it's on the bubble right now. But back to Erick Erickson. Look, I think that, essentially it's not just Erick, but I think it's the Club for Growth and Dement and Erick Erickson and Talk Radio, which is combined to, and of course they're all sort of in cahoots to a certain degree. And so it's sort of this combined group that I think really has scared a lot of people and really throws a lot of weight around. And you might say an outsized amount of weight that maybe the perception is, and that they have more power than they actually do.
Well, I guess it's sort of an underlying part of my question. I mean, look, it's not unusual for any party to go to various stakeholders or interest groups, anyone that's sort of presumably representative of some faction, and take a temperature. Is this going to be okay with you guys? Am I going to have to fight you on this, or are you going to be with me? Are you going to tell your members that, what we're doing here, it's all good, and explain it to them? So that relationship within Washington is not unusual and arguably a normal part of democracy. And it may not be unhealthy for a prominent blogger to play a similar role. That person has a relationship with a large group of people in their readerships, and therefore talking to that person is a way to talk to a representative of a larger group. But it certainly strikes me as novel. I mean, I feel like in the rise of the liberal blogosphere, conservatives used to charge Democrats with being beholden to Marcos and doing Marcos's bidding, which just struck me as ludicrous. I mean, it was very clear that no one was doing Marcos's bidding.
And Marcos's book, was it Marcos with the book? Was it Barbarians at the Gate? Was that him? Or was that?
Well, it may have been. I forget he said a few books up. I forget the title of that.
There was a blog. I think that was one of the blogs. It might have been Marcos. It might have been someone else. Had a book by that time. But my point is, I think you're dead on, Bill. And I think here's the deal. I'm really split between what's happening now, because on one hand, I think it's entirely true that for too long the good old boys ran things, and the average person was sort of told, just trust us, we'll take care of things. And I think that by and large, the rise of the Tea Party, the rise of the blogosphere, some of the old barriers to entry, were sort of torn down. And in many ways, I think that was good. I think that there's a lot of good that came from that. I mean, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today if, for example, if it wasn't for the blogosphere. If I had to go down and go to the Washington Post and say, hey, I want to be the next George Will, and they would have laughed in my face, I would have never been given the opportunity to write and to grow as a writer and to have a venue. And so, by and large, I mean, I think some of the recent developments over the last decade or whatever have been incredibly positive. But the other side of the coin, though, is that you have a lot of people exercising a lot of power and influence who, quite frankly, don't know what the hell they're talking about. They don't have, and again, I'm not saying, look, a lot of smart people got us in Vietnam. A lot of smart people, the best and the brightest, really effed a lot of stuff up. So I'm not saying, that I adhere to so-called experts, but by the same token,
you're anti-Vietnam, you want to live in a hippie commune, you're blowing my mind here today, Matt.
I mean, I'm really sort of presenting, there's two sides to this argument, okay? And, people who watch this vlog, I think, get that we're not always black and white, it's a lot of grays. But I also think, a lot of people right now who have a lot of power they're not economists. They're so convinced. I mean, there are people right now in a lot of power who are 100% convinced that if we fail to raise the debt ceiling, nothing will happen. And they're 100% convinced of that. I'm a little bit worried about the guy who doesn't have an economics degree, who's 100% convinced about things. Where do they get this confidence from? You've also got people who have no political experience, who I think don't grasp the political significance of what's happening. So I would argue, for example, that if Republicans pass the Boehner bill and it goes nowhere, I mean, Harry Reid says he's not going to, that it won't pass the Senate, and Barack Obama says he's going to veto it. So if you're a Tea Party person and you hate the Boehner bill, well, don't worry, because it's not going to pass the Senate anyway. But from a political standpoint, I would argue, if Republicans pass it, then if the debt ceiling doesn't get raised, and if there's a catastrophe and interest rates skyrocket, Republicans could at least say, well, we passed 2 bills that would have raised the debt ceiling, and the Democrats in the Senate blocked it. From a political standpoint, that seems to make a lot of sense to me. But I think a lot of the people who are really now have a lot of power don't necessarily think politically or strategically like that. And I'm sure this makes me an elitist.
About Erick Erickson. I mean, I don't know that much about him, but is there some evidence that he has either A, the economic background, or B, the political background to warrant having a position to say, I'm going to dictate what accounts for the proper conservative position here? Has he earned a level of trust legitimately to carry that kind of weight? And if not, what is it that he has done to have enough of a following to throw influence around?
Well, I mean, first, I think you and I would both agree that everyone has a right to voice their opinion. The question is, should we be listening to them? Should we, the people, be bestowing upon them a level of expertise or of wisdom or political sagacity? And that's the question. But look, Erick Erickson, I think, is a smart guy. I think he gets politics. He's a lawyer. Obviously, has been, he's on CNN as a contributor. So he's very smart. He's an astute political observer. I think he's a serious person. But let me say this, and this isn't in regards to Erick per se, but I would say with all the groups out there, here's what I'm concerned about. I'm not worried about the guy who philosophically holds a certain position. More power to him. But I think that you have a lot of people right now who are capitalizing on this for purely political or marketing reasons. If you say, Boehner's a sellout, this plan is horrible, we need to pass a balanced budget amendment or nothing. Well, never mind the fact that Republicans did pass cut, cap, and balance, and that I think, frankly, it was probably the best plan, but that it didn't get brought up in the Senate, and it's not going to. Never mind that. I think that the guy who says that and believes it and listens to talk radio, God bless that guy. People work hard, play by the rules, make this country work. My problem is with people who do that to get people to join their group, who do it to get press, who do it to get publicity. I think probably half the organizations out there who are taking this hardline approach, my guess is that a lot of them are doing it for all the wrong reasons. And that bothers me. That is what bothers me, because the stakes are so high.
I mean, is that a new development in the conservative movement that some folks are playing the game that way?
I think things have gotten more strident. I'll give you an example. And I don't want to accuse the Club for Growth of doing this, but I want to use them as an example just because it's one that I recall. It's like in 2008, during the government bailouts, and this is my recollection. I actually tried to search to see if I'd written about this, and I couldn't find it. But my recollection, and I'm quite confident that my recollection is accurate, is I was on a call, I think a conference call with Pat Toomey, who at the time was heading the Club for Growth. And at the time, the position was, we oppose the bailouts, philosophically, but it's a tough situation, and if you could be a good conservative and vote for them, we're not going to go against you for that reason alone.
They were going to score the TARP vote as counting against getting an endorsement.
That's my recollection, at least during the call. They might have changed their mind later. And keep in mind, I think it's important to also distinguish between the Bush bailouts and the Obama bailouts. But at this point, that was the position that we think it's bad, but you could be a good conservative and have a different viewpoint. Today, the Club for Growth is vehemently pushing against this. They are scoring the vote. They're getting publicity, and part of the reason, look, it's entirely possible that it's philosophically sound and that they firmly believe it. But I have to tell you, other groups have started challenging their supremacy. Groups like Freedom Works, which are ratcheting up their rhetoric and their activism and their involvement in getting involved in primaries and being players. And so now you're in competition with other groups, right? Maybe that factors into your decision. So it is very interesting what's happening right now. And again, you talk about, Bill Kristol at the Weekly Standard, right? He writes a piece, and this is a guy who's a little bit more, he's a conservative, but a little more establishment, clearly. And he says that if you oppose the Boehner deal, you're essentially pro-Obama. You're helping Obama. And Erick Erickson accused him of playing the fool again. We've got Michelle Bachmann saying she wouldn't raise the debt ceiling no matter what. It's almost as if, I could be wrong, but my reading of Michelle Bachmann is it's not that I want the balanced budget amendment. It's not that I want cut cap. It's like, no, I just don't think we should raise the debt ceiling at all.
That's my understanding for a position.
Which I think is a misunderstanding.
Wrong to raise the debt ceiling at this point.
You got to stop.
I'm sure she's voted for it in the past.
You got to stop spending before it happens. Raising the debt ceiling is sort of like shutting the barn door after, or failing to raise it. It's like shutting the barn.
So not paying your credit card payments after you already made the purchase.
So we should have not made the purchase earlier. That was the problem with the spending. And again, I'm for. God, I sound like Joe Scarborough now. And in Congress, I was.
Why don't you go join Trump already, baby? Get over with. Get a room.
But it's a fascinating thing that's happening. And again, you've got Laura Ingraham, who I think is generally considered to be a hardcore conservative, who's backing Boehner, the Boehner plan. You got Bill Kristol, and then others, and Krautheimer, Krautheimer called Bachmann's position unbelievably irresponsible on Fox News the other day. So this goes into the category, I think, though, of people who are not disagreeing because they disagree ideologically. The disagreement is over political strategy and over temperament and over a long view versus a short-term view. And I also think there are people out there who are playing this because it helps their reputation, it helps their brand. Nobody's going to get to the right of me on anything. And the masses eat it up.
I'd say we should shift gears at this point.
We should probably shift gears before I'm ousted.
I'm sorry?
We should shift gears before I lose my status as the most right-wing blogging head or whatever.
There's some similar dynamics on the left, of course. Although I feel like at this point, perhaps they're old news. They're plenty of people in the liberal bloggers are mad at Obama, that they think he's out to get entitlements. They think he's a bad negotiator. So I don't know how much value there was in going over all those things. Folks who don't know, folks are saying all those things all over again. But there's another flap on the left this week of lesser import than the full faith and credit of the American government, which is that Cenk Uygur had a falling out with MSNBC. He had a temporary host status in the 6 p.m. slot in the reshuffling of their schedule after Keith Olbermann left. And it was always sort of sold as being kind of a tryout. They never gave him his own title of a show. And last week, we know most of what has been said from what Cenk has said. I don't think we've heard as detailed a story from MSNBC's management side. But according to Cenk, he was approached and told, we're not giving you the slot permanently, but we'll give you, a contributor title and perhaps a weekend show. And Cenk said no thanks to that, and then went on a bit of a media tour, chastising MSNBC management and accusing them of not giving him a permanent slot because he was too tough on Obama. And
Al Sharpton had apparently said he wouldn't be publicly, that he would never criticize Obama.
Well, so the speculation is that Al Sharpton's going to get this slot. That's not been formalized yet, but he had been doing some guest hosting work lately. And Cenk had put out there the charge that Sharpton had said on 60 Minutes a while back that he wasn't going to be critical of Obama, and Cenk was being critical of Obama, so perhaps that was why switch was being made. And Glenn Greenwald, who's probably one of the primary critics of Obama from the left in the blogosphere, picked up that charge and questioned the ethics of even hiring Sharpton at all, giving that sort of statement. That certainly, I think, is a dominant view on the left to be, I think, liberal blogosphere, because like Cenk is sort of that community. Although I would note that despite all the outrage in the blogosphere after Keith Olbermann left, MSNBC's ratings still held steady. Their primetime lineup is still very liberal, and it's held up by Rachel Maddow, who is practically, a saint in the
By the way, there's
community.
someone. Rachel was out
for the IRA MSNBC to have that much legs.
Rachel was out last night, and someone was filling in for her. And I don't know who it was, but this other woman was like really, really smooth, like really.
I believe it was Melissa Harris Perry, if I recall.
Really polished.
Someone who's been a regular guest with Rachel.
She better watch out, because that other woman was actually pretty polished.
Well, it's interesting because I think one of the unspoken aspects of all this is that primetime cable on pretty much all networks it's pretty white. And if MSNBC hires Al Sharpton, and if Melissa Harris Perry gets a more prominent role as a guest host and contributor, that puts MSNBC as being the most diverse cable TV news lineup out there. And there are certain, I think, tensions in the progressive community, because arguably the group that is the most angry with Obama from the left is a predominantly white group, but certainly not solely. And you have certain folks out there that even throw charges of racism around to folks on the left who are criticizing Obama, saying they're not holding him to the same standard that they might hold other presidents. And there's even a trending Twitter hashtag called Before Black Presidents. That also might, I think, perhaps mitigate whatever ire there might be that Cenk was forced out. And Cenk, I should note, is not Anglo-Saxon himself. Nevertheless, the fact that Sharpton would be taking over probably makes it, I think, harder for there to be a real, crusade against MSNBC from the left, because Sharpton is not really considered, a right-winger, and a lot of folks on the left are going to like the fact that MSNBC is a more diverse lineup now.
Yeah, a more diverse ethnically.
Yeah.
Not intellectually or philosophically. Let me say. Fox News is obviously no different on that score. I mean, MSNBC you could argue MSNBC has the most ideologically diverse lineup of anything if you go to the morning. Go back to Studio Scarborough, which is a right-leaning show. Jamie Weinstein here at the Daily Caller made an interesting observation in a column the other day that Fox runs more sort of straight news than, in other words, MSNBC starting at like 3 really goes to sort of hosts with viewpoints. whereas Fox, at 6 o'clock has Shepard Smith, and has what's his name doing Fox
Brett
News.
Baird.
Yeah, Brett Baird. And so that Fox actually, during more of the prime time evening hours, has more straight news, whereas MSNBC switches to all opinion-oriented hosts earlier.
There is an argument that there's nothing on Fox News that constitutes straight news. But
yeah, I think Shep Smith clearly is.
Shep Smith is definitely the outlier of Fox News.
Yeah, but he's got an hour-long show during a pretty prominent time of the day. So but anyway, let me talk a little bit about Cenk and Reverend Al, because I'm actually a regular guest on the show, and I've been on with Cenk many, many times. I like him personally. Think he's a very nice guy, and I've never met Reverend Al that I know of face to face, but I've been on many times with him.
He's been in a different box than you on the screen.
Yeah, he's in a different city. He's in New York. Right. I'm in D.C. But actually, Cenk and I have met several times, and I like him a lot. He was a nice guy, and I wish him luck. It is interesting. A couple of things I would say about the whole situation. First, I admire Cenk's. I admire him for kind of keeping it real and for sort of saying, I'm going to keep my intellectual integrity, my creative integrity, and damn the man. I admire that. And part of it, I think, is because he has his own video, YouTube show, The Young Turks, which is quite successful. And I think he senses that cable news. I don't know if he would have made this decision 10 years ago had he had the chance to be on MSNBC versus doing his own thing. But I think he's had success with that, and I admire him for standing up for what he believes in. I think, though, I would have probably handled it differently. If someone said to me, Matt, I want you to be liberal or to be pro-abortion, I would say I can't do that. But if they said I want you to wear a pink shirt, not a blue shirt, I'm like, fine. If they were like, I want you to be a little bit tougher on the guests, would say yes. They're the boss. You work for them. And I think it sounds to me like he had a really good opportunity that he could have. I think he lives in L.A. He could have done it from L.A. He would have been a regular contributor. They would have paid him quite handsomely from what he says. I tell you what, you turn that down, you're not going to, you're done. I'm guessing he's done with, MSNBC. I don't think Phil Griffin is going to have him back. I wish that I had the opportunity that he had, that he essentially threw away. There are a lot of liberals out there, I bet you, who would die for the opportunity to have the chance he had that he kind of said no to. So it is interesting, but again, you got to admire the guy for standing up. He thought they were asking him to dance, and he said, no, I'm not going to dance.
Example, I think we talked about this before, the fact that, Keith Olbermann was willing to leave with some assurance that he'd be able to maintain a platform outside of the saying cable news format, in part because of the internet.
Right.
And Glenn Beck similarly said,
yep.
I don't have to bend over backwards to stay at Fox because I'm going to set up the Blaze and I have to my radio show and I can have an online presence.
And how's that working out for them?
Well, it's probably a little too early to judge. You could look at it one way in that, the numbers that Keith Olbermann has at Current TV are not what he had at MSNBC, but there's certainly an improvement upon what Current was getting, and it gives Current a toehold to try to build up a new brand. And I don't know at all. I think Glenn Beck's other online projects outside of his radio show are still probably in their infancy. So I don't know if we can
It's
judge
like
it.
It's like the Doors refusing to say, girl, you wouldn't get much better on Ed Sullivan show instead of Fire, right? There is a certain sort of I'm going to be myself that I admire, but I think a lot of people would crawl through broken glass for the opportunity that he sort of let go. The other thing too is Reverend Al Sharpton. I think he's a good host. I think he does a good job. But I think the problem that I would have is that he is, by definition, I mean, he's clearly an activist, clearly a liberal activist. And I would prefer, like, the MSNBC.
Is there no one on Fox News who would not consider conservative activists who host shows?
Well, I just say what I like to watch, and I'm weird. I'm not the guy giving these cable stations their ratings, but like what I like watching on MSNBC is Joe Scarborough has on Mark Halperin or Chuck Todd, or Chris Matthews has on Chris Cillizza and Howard Feynman. Like, that's what I like. I can learn something from them. Most of them are liberal leaning, yes, but they essentially are analysts. I don't need someone right or left, yelling, telling, spouting. I mean, this is hackery. Whether it's left-wing or right-wing hackery, it's just so lame. Some of the stuff that they push on these ideological shows. I don't learn anything from the con job of the day or whatever it is that they have. I'm
fully with you on anti-hackery. I don't even have cable TV anymore. I don't watch. The only time I watch any of these shows is these little bits and pieces online for the very same reasons that you have laid out. I generally have not find a lot of these shows to be informative anymore, although I do think Rachel's show is an exception to a lot of that.
And that's why people should watch the Weekend Blog. No hackery.
That I also fully agree with. But I would also note, Joe Scarborough, who I'm not a huge fan of, I don't care for his ideology. I think he has sort of a phony centrism to his show. But I do think it's fair to say that even though he came onto TV as a congressman, I mean, not just an activist, he was an elected official, and shifted from that to be on the TV, and he is not as simple as just having a show that is just this endless stream of talking points. There is discussion on the show. So just because you are one thing at one point in your career doesn't mean once you get in the anchor chair that you're going to be exactly the same way. It's very possible that Al Sharpton's show is a wonderful salon of varying opinion. We haven't seen that show come into play yet. I mean, just because he was an activist before doesn't mean he's an activist in the anchor chair. It's to be seen. But even if he ends up being an activist, most Fox News anchors are effectively conservative activists, but they get good ratings, so who cares? As far as Fox News is concerned, I mean, it's maybe not great for the body politic or for discourse, and I'm not going to watch it. Maybe you don't watch it.
Yeah.
But there's certainly a business model, which says, who cares? And both MSNBC and Fox have accepted that, embraced it, and CNN sort of struggles with it, tries to figure out how can they play
in that
universe.
And I will say, the first time I was on, actually I was on with him. I was on with Reverend Al like a year ago or something when he was guest hosting for like Dylan or something. But the first time I was on with him like a month ago when he first sort of took over, but no one knew he was taking over. He was a little bit slow, and there's a weird rhythm because what people who aren't on TV may not realize is that it's all about time, and it's so important that you talk really fast and end. And he sort of threw me off my game a little bit because he was like slower than normal hosts, like not slower in terms of his mind working, but his actual speaking patterns. Mm-hmm. But since then, since that first time, he's really doing really well, and I think he's actually very good at it. And he's had some he's had a couple of really good moments where he was like really taking on like Joe Walsh from the Eagles. And various Republicans where he would get into arguments with them. So I think he's doing a fine job. My only concern would be I'd rather see, well, as I've described, the kind of programming that I like from a consumer standpoint.
In addition to your hatred of the Vietnam War and desire to live in a hippie commune, you do listen to NPR.
I do like NPR. I like Terry Gross. I think is one of the best interviewers in the nation.
Why are you trying to destroy your career?
I put her up there with Charlie Rose. I think that Wait, Don't Tell Me and Car Talk and This American Life. They've got some great programming on the weekends, especially. So.
James O'Keefe's going to slap you in the face next time he sees you.
Well, I don't think James O'Keefe likes me anyway. But I also love Adam Carolla and Tony Kornheiser. Those are my other guilty pleasures. I love their stuff, and they keep me connected to real America. And I grew up listening to Rush Limbaugh. I've been listening to Rush since he first went national in like 1988. And by the way, Rush's brother David Limbaugh, in today's Washington Times, wrote a great review about my book, which is behind me, The Quotable Road. And Rush Limbaugh's brother in the Washington Times today. I'm going to get a hard copy of that somewhere. Where do you buy the Washington Times? I assume there are boxes by the Metro or something. I mean, where do you buy any newspaper? Not just them. I mean, if you go to Starbucks, you can get like the New York Times. But where do you buy? I don't know. It's old media, but it'd be nice to have a dead-free version of this.
Are you a little mad at Sarah Palin? She didn't do any kind of announcement around the book release. It seems like she's not trying to help you out here.
Well, we keep holding our breath. We keep our fingers crossed.
She's letting Michelle Bachmann just eat up all this conservative base vote. She's not even challenging it.
Well, the latest yesterday came out that Palin is speaking at a Tea Party convention in Iowa in August, leading some to speculate there may be an announcement in September. So we'll see. But it's so funny, dude. My media to promote the book is completely tied to what she does. I mean, it's no use even trying to promote the book to get on TV to talk about it unless Palin's in the news. So it's intricately tied to her. And I mean, I was very fortunate that when the book came out for about a week or so, she was in the news. You had the movie and her emails coming out from her time in Alaska. So it actually worked out pretty darn well for me, considering if it came out this week, it would have been a little bit rough.
Has there been any conservative bloggers' reaction to how that movie did? It seems like it fizzled out pretty quickly.
No, I mean, I think, realistic expectations. I mean, it is what it is. I think it did pretty well considering, if you compare it, this is a mistake that, I thought it wasn't fair, Joshua Green over at The Atlantic and some others tried to compare it to, Michael Moore. It's like, Fahrenheit 9/11 is the best-selling documentary of all time. So I don't think it's really a fair comparison. I mean, but if you compare it to most sort of documentaries.
Compare it to Sicko, perhaps.
Maybe, I don't know.
Sicko is not the biggest Michael Moore film of all time.
If you compare it to most political documentaries, I think it probably did really, really well. And look, that Newsweek cover story that came out about Palin was clearly influenced by the movie, and it was obviously very positive. So positive that you had people like Lawrence O'Donnell accusing them of being in league with Palin and cutting some deal over it. So the movie, I think, not only performed well in the box office. I'm speaking in terms of
relatively speaking to local documentaries.
Yeah, I mean it's not gonna it's not Titanic, but I think it did reasonably well. But I think it also advanced the political debate and frankly helped me sell some books. So I got nothing but good things to say about the movie.
I have a hard time understanding why whenever we judge how well a political movie is doing or a political book is doing. There seems to be a general lack of context and perspective of the numbers. So, yeah, on one hand, you could say most political documentaries do terribly. Most political documentaries don't even make $1 million. So I'm sure it does better on that curve. But you look at, I'm not just trying to pick on Sarah Palin here. I think this is true for lots of liberal movies and liberal books too. Most books don't sell 100,000 copies. I mean, if you're selling 100,000 copies of a book, you're in bestseller category by a mile. Whereas 100,000 people going to a movie is a giant disaster. To get $1 million for a movie, ticket prices are $8, $9 these days. It's a very small number of people that would even get you to such.
Yeah, it's so weird. And record sales, I was hearing somebody said when Amy Winehouse, won a Grammy, she sold 24,000 copies that week or something. And I'm thinking, doesn't really seem like that many copies.
Right. Well, it's not.
Is that really
Look, I mean, it's a country of 300 million people.
I mean, I feel like I could sell 24,000 copies of my album if I really hustled. not in a week, but eventually.
Right. So almost even the most successful political movies or political books are almost solely going to be the result of appealing to existing fan bases, and are almost never going to be an example of a broader, societal phenomena that goes beyond, an ideological faction. I mean, unless you have some other anecdotal evidence to suggest that it's actually spreading beyond obvious constituencies, it's almost never that interesting a story about how well something did. Although, I mean, I think the problem for Palin is the big question mark is, can she ever do something that would show she would appeal beyond her existing conservative base? And I think there seems to be some sort of argument that the documentary would have some sort of enticing appeal beyond that. And I think certainly that has not proven true.
Well, the other thing, though, man, is these political documentaries, and real people, regular people don't go to see them. I mean,
that's right.
We do. I went to see.
It's a poor tool to use if you're trying to spread your message beyond your fan base.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I think, look, Palin didn't have to pay for this, and I think it was a huge win for her. Was it? If she had to pay for it, would it have been a good use of money? Well, that's a different question. But the fact that Palin did nothing and has my book come out and has this movie come out, which clearly influenced the debate, it got her attention, it framed the Newsweek cover story. I mean, it's clearly a win for her. And by the way, interesting polling that I'm seeing today. I saw something about how actually there was a Gallup poll or something that Palin actually was performing better among moderate Republicans than conservative Republicans, something like that. So it is interesting. And she still, in many polls, is doing very well and beating Michelle Bachmann if she's in the race. So we'll just have to wait and see. But for my sake, I hope she gets in and runs hard.
Well, let's leave on that note, Matt. Always good to talk to you.
Very good talking to you, my friend. And don't think I didn't watch you and Solstice talking about the Daily Caller, because I did. I watched every minute of it, and I took notes. And
I'm sure we were the buzz of the caller that day.
Yeah, I think you were talking about the Michelle Bachmann story that my colleague Jonathan Strong broke. But I'm watching. I watch what you guys say about me in the Daily Caller when I'm not on. Just letting you know.
I'll watch my step then.
Just checking you. All right, man.
All right.
Have a good one.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.